you are the organizer, press the star key now. Please enter your working ID.
Hello.
It's on now.
Hearing what? No. Okay. Jesus.
It's kind of weird. Some of them, it's like they're on if they're off, and they're off if they're on.
If the Veronica doesn't show up, maybe I should sit up there. That's why. Oh. Well, at least that way it frees the seat if it's not necessary. At least that way it would free up the seat if it's not necessary. Hello.
Today, but nothing today so far, so I guess
In
maybe
the
I'm
queue.
getting better. I don't know what it is, but I have some blood work coming up soon.
Last night,
Hopefully something will show
they
up.
were on when they were off. See? I'm on? Oh, Am I on now? My light's on, is my sound on?
Yeah.
Hello, come in Milwaukee.
Alex, things are turning. Everything's reversed. I'm not able to turn these off.
It's on delay because there's like numbers coming on and off. Yeah, I think it's still like right now numbers is on and then it just turned off. So I think it's on delay when you keep on pushing that, it's not catching it, it's not keeping pace with it.
Yeah, but the mic's not supposed to go on until.
Yeah, his is on, nobody's been there.
Press that mic there.
With
See,
this,
tap it. Tap the mic.
it's on.
See,
Mine's not. Her light is on and her mic is on. Now she's off. Veronica's off.
So just give it a few seconds and then should be fine.
Now you're on.
I'll give it a second.
Go help him.
and it says open.
Then you?
Yeah, no, see that?
But now it's on. So I pressed you, now it's
Yeah,
on.
but
So it
this
just
one
takes-
went on without me touching it.
Well, then let's see if we can take that
Yeah.
one off. And then hopefully.
Well, yeah, it's off. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it just takes a few seconds.
But what I mean, it comes back on without me touching anything.
Well, it's okay right now. so-
Yeah, but,
And yours is still on. It's on
okay,
as
all right. Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's 4:05, and I'd like to call this adjourned city council meeting from June 4th, 2020 at 4 p.m. It's actually 4:05. And Chief, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Roll call. And I'll just say Faria.
Here,
Johnson Santos.
Here.
Jones. Lewis. Villalta here. We do have a quorum. Consideration of approval of agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll move, I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Oh, do I need to
Push the button. There we go.
All right.
I'll move to approve the agenda as submitted.
Okay.
Mine's already on.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's motion by Faria, second by Johnson Santos for the approval agenda. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? None carried. Let's go on to public forum. Members of the public may address the city council on any item of interest that is within the jurisdiction of the city council. This includes agenda and non-agenda items. No action will be taken on non-agenda items, and speakers may submit their comments by submitting a written statement or by dropping it off to the utility payment box at City Hall, 520 J Street, by mail or emailing cityclerk@losbanos.org. Comments received will be read into the record during the city council meeting. Are we okay? We're good? Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go on to item 6. Conduct the City of Los Banos 2021 fiscal year budget workshop. Okay, who's going to present that?
Anybody want to? Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it then. So tonight what we have for you is the initial run through of our budget workshop, or our budget for fiscal year 2021. The requirements to adopt a budget include a public notice and hearing, so we'll have that for the June 17th meeting. It'll be noticed in both tomorrow's paper and the following week, just to let everybody know that we'll be holding that workshop on June 17th in the council chambers at 4 p.m. The budget legally has to be adopted by June 30th in order for us to spend any funding. Council may amend anything that you adopt. They can continue to amend throughout the year, which you guys know we do that on a continuous basis. The appropriations lap at year end, so this nice budget book that I have here, as of July 1st, it means nothing anymore to us. If we didn't have the chance or the time to spend the money, then it's lapsed, and hopefully we carried it forward. If we missed something, then that would be one of the amendments that I talked about. We would bring it back to council to let you know, oh, we're not going to make it by June 30th. We need to carry this money forward if it's something we weren't aware of and we didn't already include it in the following year's budget. Council must approve all expenditures, and this prohibits staff from overspending, and it ensures accountability and transparency for the public. Tonight, what we'll go over are the different fund types that we have, which of course there's the general fund, which we know is basically everything that's not eligible for another fund. It's where police and fire run out of, and a lot of our public works departments, including recreation. Special revenue funds are used to account for specific sources, and these are things like Measure P. That money was raised and put in there for a specific person, and that is for fire or for police. There's a variety of other special revenue funds that we'll also discuss tonight. Those are things like impact fees. And then we have the enterprise funds, which these are the types of funds that we treat as businesses. We can't generate more money in that fund than we can account for spending. So whether it's for personnel or infrastructure or equipment needs, we can't charge more for these activities than we have the
expenditures to pay out. And those are things like water, sewer, garbage, and the airport district. And then finally, there's internal service funds. And these are activities that affect each of the departments. And so they're just basically, they have their own budget, but they're charged out to the other departments. And this includes IT, and it also includes fleet. So we'll go over a couple of those funds tonight for each category. I don't know, back in May, I believe it was, we had a workshop about what we were doing this year differently to build the budget, not only because of COVID and not being able to meet with staff at a face-to-face basis, but also what our expectations for the unknown economic crisis that we're in. So when we were building the budget, what we tried to do and mainly focus on is that we just wanted to maintain the levels that we were at for the current budget year, which is the 19-20 fiscal year. So you'll see through the budget that if we didn't have to increase it, we didn't increase it. There are some items like personnel costs that we can't control, health insurance, things like that, that we did increase, but you'll see very limited to adding other resources like equipment purchases, unless, again, it's a special revenue fund and that money has been set aside specifically for that. We are a lot more sensitive in the general fund area. We did talk before at that priorities workshop that we would be reducing personnel costs. We are taking a phased approach. If you remember, we started with taking part-time employees off of the schedule, and then we did a couple furloughs after that that were effective in April. And we have a phase 3 expectation if needed, which means we would have to do further furloughs or layoffs. And if that ever happened, then that would come back to council. We're not at that point right now, but we are going to be constantly monitoring the budget so we know if we have to get there, and we want to be prepared for it rather than have to do it at a later date where we're really behind. So we built everybody back into the budget, and I'll say that as an example, recreation department, they were one of the departments that was furloughed because obviously we can't have recreation programs at this time. So those 3 employees have been furloughed. They're built into the budget. You'll see them in here tonight, but as of right now, we don't know when we'll be bringing them back because, one, it has to be legally required for us to be able to do the different programs. And then we'll continue to monitor the revenue levels to make sure that, yes, we still have the affordability to hold these programs. So, but we built it into the budget as though we can. So you'll see that tonight. You'll also see reduced capital spending. So we'll go over a few items that we've temporarily removed from the budget because we're trying to reduce costs, or we've placed in the budget, but it has a sort of hold on it that they still need the city manager's permission before they could actually make that purchase. So you'll see items like that. The same goes for materials and supplies. And then we do want to continue to increase revenue sources. And by that, last night's a good example. You guys did approve to do the CPI increases for the LLDs, and I think there were 2 additional districts that went up by their maximum percentage. And those are the types of things we don't want to fall behind on. So in addition to LLDs, we built into the budget the Prop 218 increases. So the Prop 218 increases are increased annually by CPI. The CPI this year is 2.91%. So effective July 1st, we would raise water, sewer, and garbage rates by that 2.9%. And just to give you a little overview, right now the minimum bill for water, sewer, and garbage is $89.54. With that increase, it would bring the bill up to $92.13. That's a $2.60 monthly increase, which comes out to about $31.20 annually. We don't want to fall behind on that because if you remember the first time we did this, we were several years behind and we had to make large increases. So it's better just to continue with the small increases so we stay current than fall behind and put that huge impact on our residents at a later date. So those costs are also built into this budget. Just as an overview for the budget, the general fund budget is projected expenditures at $18.6 million, and this does include our Measure H expenditures. The total budget, so all funds considered, is projected to spend $57.5 million. Our year-end general fund reserves are projected at 13 million. Now, these are unassigned. That means that we've backed out the general fund, any fund balance that there might be for Measure H. We've backed that out because those funds are considered assigned because we have a specific purpose for them. We do have special funding for some capital projects that is also assigned. So we back those numbers out as well. So of that $13 million, council did pass a fund balance policy that says that we have to keep 30% of whatever our projected expenditures are for the year in the fund balance. So that essentially assigns it, but it's informally assigned. But of that 13 million, 5.6 must remain. So the difference is actually what's available to spend. So we're going to go over general fund revenues to begin with. There is a lot of information. I'm going to try to remember to tell everybody what page I'm on so you could see the book and we can kind of go through it together. That way, if you have any questions that I'm not covering, you can bring them up. And please feel free to interrupt me because there is a lot of information. I think that we are currently on slide 6 and I have 44. So sit back and relax. General fund revenues. So general fund, so just so you know, on the first page of the book, it says summary of fund balance. That brings all the information together. So you'll see the estimated beginning balance. That's where we are estimating to end the current year at. Then you'll see the next column is requested revenues. Transfers in, that means we transferred the money in from a different fund. Requested expenditures, transfers out. So if it's transferring in from one fund, it's obviously coming out of another fund. And then where we plan to end the 2020-2021 fiscal year. So those will be all the fund balances at the end of the year. General fund revenues begin on page 5. Just to kind of go over this page as well so you know how to read it. We did this book because the first book is usually, just a workbook and we throw it away. So we tried to keep it as basic as we could for council. So we weren't wasting additional money. So the very first column, and all revenue pages will read the same as expenditure pages. So the very first column to your left, the top of the column says 2018 actual. That's just for a comparison where we finished out the fiscal 2018 year. The same goes for the next column, 2019. Those are actual numbers. The 2020 adopted is where any budget adoptions. So when you adopted the original budget and any additions, that's this number here is adopted. But the next column, which is what we're basing everything off of, is estimated. And that's basically where do we plan on finishing the current year at. So for revenues, if we have expectations coming in lower than we originally budgeted, you may see that in items like sales tax revenue. We budgeted to bring $5 million in, but now we're estimating to only get $4.9 million. Yes, ma'am.
Hold it.
Oh.
Okay. All right, try it now.
So maybe I'm getting ahead of you, but I'm looking at property tax, sales tax, and there's a significant jump in Measure H and the sales tax. But with the sales taxes and the property taxes, have you gotten any kind of assurance from the state of California yet that they're going to be dispersing down the property taxes that are due to the counties and locals?
So as far as property taxes go, they haven't done any type of deferral program or anything different than the norm. So we're expecting at this point in time for property taxes to come in, and we are even including the small 2% escalation, sorry, I can't say the word today, that we normally do. So generally we're a little bit higher, but we're being conservative and staying at the 2% as far as property taxes go. Sales tax revenue, now that's the one that it has 2 different deferral programs, and we've actually already seen the impact of that. We received our our first quarter payment, and we only brought in $137,000 for sales tax, and we generally bring in $400,000 a quarter. So that's almost a $300,000 difference. Now, that doesn't mean that money is not coming in. It just means it's deferred. That program was not something that businesses had to apply for. It was an automatic deferral, just like your taxes. You didn't have to apply to not pay them until July. It was an automatic deferral for businesses. So they just had the option not to do it until a later date. They have 6 months, 3 to 6 months, depending on which program they're in. So we may, in addition to losing revenue, we may also be experiencing a cash flow problem, which just means the money still has to go out, but it's not coming in because the governor did offer that deferral program. This is where the fund balance comes into play. This is why we need that extra fund balance so we can take our little nest egg and go ahead and keep on paying the bills that we need to pay until that is filled back up with the revenues that should have been coming in on a regular basis.
So it's not lost money, it's deferred money.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we will have a loss in revenue, and we're about to get to that. We are anticipating a loss in revenue not only for the current fiscal year, but for the fiscal budget that we're discussing tonight. So combined, we're expecting about a 6% loss in revenue in just sales tax revenue. So we're anticipating it to drop 2% this year, the current fiscal year, and another 3.8 or 4% for next fiscal year. So we will see both a loss and a deferral. So it's not good, and that's why we're being super conservative with this budget, and that's why this is more of a rollover budget than, okay, let's go and just build it out in the way that we normally do. We know we could afford 2019, 2020 expenditures with the dip in revenue. So that's why we're trying to stick to that number. So just to get back to this, what we're really comparing tonight would be that 2020 estimated column, because that's where we expect to finish out this current year. And then if you go over a few columns, it says 2021 requested, and those are the numbers that we're requesting for you to adopt at the next city council meeting. So back to sales tax revenue. We are estimating with all the sales tax revenue that will be bringing in about $5 million for the current fiscal year. And that's where you'll see that 3.8% decline because we're only anticipating bringing in $4.8 million for next year, which is a $200,000 loss. Sales tax for Measure H, the reason you don't see a dip is because we originally assumed we would bring in $2.5 million for this year. It exceeded our expectations by about $142,000. So we just left it when we did our decrease. That puts us right back at our 2.5 million, which is our safety net. That was our bottom line basic number to go by anyway. So we're still good functioning Measure H in the manner that we had anticipated when we started it. Property taxes, you'll see this 2% increase. We're going from 3.8 million, 3,826,000 to 3,897,000, which is about a $70,000 increase. Property tax in lieu is about a $63,000 increase. Other taxes, so for other taxes, you'll see all the different categories beginning on page 6. I'm sorry, can't see this close to my face. I'm sorry, it starts on page 5 and ends on page 6. And the total for that, which includes things like permits and business licenses and animal licenses, false alarm fees, we have anticipated a $32,000 decrease. Permits, we're only estimating 300 permits, which is down from the current year by about 150 permits. And then business licenses, we had a category, it was a certain fee that we had for business licenses that was eliminated. It was an admin fee that was eliminated when we redid the business license ordinance, so that's part of this decrease as well. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there's a decrease in animal impound fees of roughly $3,000. What does that do to? Are we not bringing in as many animals to the shelter? Is that what it is?
No, we're very conservative when we budget these items, and we always just budget on the lower end with the expectation that maybe not as many animals will be dropped off. So we try to budget on the lower end, but we always go over. We'll still have this probably the same capacity, if not exceeding what we're currently at. It's just more of a conservative approach.
And I had one other question. On the license fee, I see that the license fee went down for animals as well from $5,000 to $401.27. What does that do to?
So Gary, so last year's budget, we brought in $5,700 in animal licenses. We're estimating only to to end at 4,100.
That can be a combination. We're actually seeing a decrease in our intake of animals at the shelter. So proudly, we say that in the last 2 years, we've actually, I wish I had the numbers with me exactly, but to go back to the intake at the actual shelter, for the first 2 year, or in the last 2 years, this year, let me go back, 2018 and 2019, calendar year, because we're talking fiscal year here, we were under 2,000 animals at intake. So that has some effect on the first question that you asked. We're taking in less animals, and that first question had to do with, was it
The
impound?
impound fees.
The impound fees. So the licensing can be a fluctuation. Some of the licensing is 1, 2, or 3 years. So some animals are being licensed for 3 years as opposed to 1 year. So that could be part of it. I don't have the numbers in front of me to go over them with you more specifically, but I can certainly look into it and get you an answer.
Do we send out reminders to people who
We
have-
don't yet.
We don't?
No.
Okay. Because I know that, you know, I have to go back and look at my records to figure out when I did it and put it on my calendar. So
Yeah.
it's easy to forget if you're not getting a notice to
Yeah.
tell you that license is due.
Yes.
Is that something that in the future that we can
Yeah,
perhaps
absolutely.
look at to
Absolutely.
start?
And we figured on that, that was built in?
Yes, that was
Okay.
built in, and we did have a sharing, which was built into each expenditure, depending on what department it was for admin.
All right.
So, that's what, we've already received the check from them, and we've already made all necessary payments. Next line, charges for services, you'll see a $382,000 decrease there. And that's because of things like workers' comp. So when we have workers' comp checks, we do have to run them through revenue and pay them out to employees. So you'll see the revenue side here, but not the expenditure side. That comes out in different budgets depending on where that person is paid out of which department. Also decreasing are items like permits, which will be reviewed at mid-year, which we always do on an annual basis. If it seems as though the economy is picking up, then we'll add a revenue source for permits if we have more activity. And then finally, other revenues. This includes interest income. So if the economy is having a hard time, obviously our interest drops and vice versa, but it also depends on what our fund balance is. The larger fund balance we have, the more we have in interest income. If we're spending out those funds, then we're creating less of an interest income. And so our rough estimate, because of deferrals and things like that, is to be $253,000 loss. So overall, we're anticipating $20.3 million to be brought in the current fiscal year and only $19 million for next fiscal year. Sorry, the speakers are really buzzing over here. It's very distracting. So we're anticipating $1.2 million decrease in general fund revenues for the next budget year.
All right, so how much of that 1.263057 is lost money for good?
So some of that money, like I discussed, is grant money that we may
Yeah.
not be reapplying for. The fire strike team, I can't really say because we can't anticipate. So if fire season is bad again, then we can get that $100,000 back there. What we can say for sure is that we lost. We're anticipating losing about $410,000 of that amount to sales tax revenue for the decrease, not the deferral, the decrease.
Okay.
There's about $120,000 that we're anticipating losing because of recreation programs. So as you know, April, May, June, July, those are our busy months. Those are when the programs really kick in, school's starting to get out. We have a lot of summer and spring activities. We haven't been able to do any of those. So that's a loss. And so far that's at $120,000. That's basically anticipating through the end of July. If it goes further out than that, then we're going to have a bigger loss. Those are just the general fund losses. We do also have a slight decrease in TOT taxes. So one of our biggest quarters is when they have the Merced County Spring Fair.
Right.
We didn't have the fair this year, so we lost TOT revenue, and that we're anticipating to be about another $45,000. So to answer your question, Mike, we're at about $500,000 to $600,000 of this money that's not coming back for sure.
Okay, yeah, that because the 1.2 doesn't look good, but 5 or 6 doesn't look good, but it's not.
It's tolerable, and
Yeah.
it's something that we can maintain
Yeah.
by just making small decreases to the current budget, which
Okay.
is what we did.
All right.
So now we're going to go over the general fund budget. We're going to go department by department. The general fund budget starts on page 11 with admin. But just so you get an overall view, all departments together we're budgeting $18 million. That is $1 million increase over the previous year. These are the items that I said that are beyond our control and that we have to include in the budget. Those are step increases. Anybody who is still stepping, which means that maybe they've worked here for 3 years and they're eligible for a merit increase. If they have a good evaluation, they get a 5% increase depending on what level that they're on. Those are built into the budget. They're not automatic. They're not for sure. It just depends on what your evaluation says. Health insurance, the way that our MOUs read with all the bargaining groups and miscellaneous is that we would pay up to a $3,000 a month cap. That leaves us from where we're at now with health insurance to that cap is about a 6.9% increase. So that amount was built in the budget. That doesn't mean that health insurance is only going to increase by that amount. That's what we budgeted. That's the portion that the city is responsible for at this point in time. You'll also see PERS increases. All the different tiers went up this year. Safety tier 1 went up by 4.7%, tier 2, 3%, and PEPRA is a little less than 1%. Miscellaneous went up by 4.9%, tier 2 went up by 1%, and PEPRA for them went up by 8%. I'm sorry, by 0.1%. It says 0.8%, but it's 1%. So we have those PERS increases built in as well. So if you're a tier 1 employee and you make $50,000, you take that, they would pay 38% of that is what we pay to them in PERS. if they were a miscellaneous employee. Electricity and gas throughout the budget has increased by approximately 7%. And then, of course, these numbers include assigned and committed funds, which I talked about before. We put money away to do special projects like the general plan update. So this doesn't necessarily affect our bottom line because we already set that money aside. So that's in the assigned funding. So when we talk about the fund balance, that money's already been backed out of there. The general fund, just so you know, is $225,000 to, the general plan is $225,000 to finish it out, and it should be over this year. This is just a graph so you can see revenues versus expenditures. The blue line is the revenues and where we've been at since 2011 and where we expect to be out in 2021. Anytime the blue and the red line are touching, it's bad. That means that we're either right at what we brought in, or if the red line goes above the blue line, then we're spending more money than we're bringing in. When you see the gap in between the blue and red line, that's technically where we want to be. That means our revenues are coming in higher than our expenditures. When we do that, that gives us the ability to go ahead and fund capital projects that we might have, make the large equipment purchases or replacement purchases that we might want to do, and pay off PERS. We have funding set aside to pay off PERS faster than normal. In these situations, because of the time frame when it's actually touching in the few years that it is, it's because we've decided to use some of that fund balance and do a special project. So in the cases where it's touching, it's not always horrible. 2021, this year, you'll see that our fund balance, we're ending with a positive balance of $89,000. That means we left ourselves a little bit of cushion. We're not using the fund balance to balance the budget. We actually have an operating surplus. We intentionally left that cushion because even though we built out that budget, there's still a lot of uncertainties. We don't know if sales tax is going to take a bigger hit than we've anticipated. We don't know if something will change with property tax. So we left a little bit of a cushion, hoping that we could use these expenditures to cover costs without doing further cuts to the budget.
And our unrestricted reserve is?
$13 million less the $5 million cap. And we'll go over that a little bit more.
All right.
So expenditures by department, starting with admin. This is going to be kind of fast because, like I said, we don't have a lot of changes. We don't have a lot of increases. Beginning on page 11, you can see that some of the increases that we do have are salaries and benefits, and those are, again, the costs that I talked about that I said we don't have any control over. Insurance costs are workers' comp insurance, liability insurance, things like that, and so those usually increase on an annual basis. This year is an election year, so we built money into the budget for that as well. Because your salaries are paid out of general fund, water, sewer, and garbage, the election costs can be split that same way. So 25% of the election is in the general fund, and that's about $5,000 that we estimate out. So that's an increase. Another increase is this year, PERS is making us pay for a Social Security report that they do for us normally for free. It's something that we're required to have. They used to do it for free. They're no longer doing it for free. It's an additional $2,000, but it's also a requirement. So that's included here in the budget. And then miscellaneous equipment. That's actually a carryover. So because of COVID and what's happening, we had to put the point-to-point project and the citywide camera project on hold because obviously we couldn't do construction. We can't get the equipment that we need, and we just generally can't have the people here doing it. So those costs, which are $170,000, were carried forward from 2020 to the 2021 year.
So are there any plans to add to that now that it's a new budget year? And not just because I thought we were going to add each year to the camera system to expand it.
Well, we do want to add to it, on an annual basis to make sure we expand it. But
Yeah.
because we haven't even started it yet and we don't know when we're going to start it, we just went over and carried the money that we had in there.
Okay,
It's not
so-
saying that we can't come back at a later time and expand it. It's just that let's just move forward and start the project before we start adding additional funding to
Yeah,
it.
I don't have a problem with that, but then, so we're saying this is a living document? and
Oh,
that
yes, the budget
it-
is definitely a living document and can
Yeah.
be changed at any time.
Okay, so once we get the point-to-point established with the 170, we can come back and add money to it for that year to expand it for this year.
Yes, if the
Okay.
money's available and the
All right.
economic downturn doesn't get any worse, then definitely.
Mr. Mayor, just one comment, sorry. You asked if this was a living document. The budget is always a living document. This fiscal year, it's gonna live even more. We will be back to you probably several times, definitely more times than usual, regarding this budget, providing updates on revenues and our situation really fairly regularly this upcoming fiscal year. So this document is absolutely living.
Okay, good. You hear that, 5 council members, you know, they come to us, we come to them, all right? Okay,
Yes, as we're collecting new revenue information, we will definitely be bringing that back to council for an update, good or bad, so
Okay.
you know what our expectations are, and you're not surprised if we have to make further cuts.
Right.
And obviously, if revenues are coming in better, then there's things that we need and would like to get done, so we'll be bringing those back to council to add to the budget if available.
good explanation, thank you.
Okay, so then, yes, ma'am.
Oh, Mrs. Lewis, go ahead.
Maybe if I turn this off when somebody else talks.
Yeah. Let's try it again, Mrs. Lewis.
My button is stuck.
Try it now.
Okay, it's on. On page 11, account number 100-231, professional services for 170,000. What falls in that category?
Everything. So any contract services that we might have falls into that category. So when we're doing legal fees for negotiations, that may fall into that category depending on what bargaining group we're working with. Legal fees for our city attorney fall into this bargaining or to this line item. We have several different contracts like Muni Services, which is our sales tax, that we pay them out of there. That falls into that. So any contracts like that. What else can I think of off of the top of my head? I have you know what? I have a whole list right here for you.
Well, while you're looking that up, one of the things that came to my mind is for the past couple of years, we've been paying for a lobbyist.
That is paid out of technical service, actually, because it's more of a specialty, and I believe that's in the technical service line item.
Okay, so
Or it looks like that's
I don't
blank.
see
so I'm
anything on the
fine.
technical service line.
No,
item.
you're right. It is in professional services. We sometimes use that for other items, but I misspoke, and it's in professional services.
Okay. Has there been an analysis done? And I don't know what dollar amount we're paying him because it's lumped in he or she into this professional services category. But with the way things are going right now and the monies that we need to do operation here in our city, we've cut some special things out of the budget like the dog park and things like that. I'm just wondering whether or not the cost of paying him outweighs what he or she has been able to bring into our city as far as grants, any funds that we get from the state or the federal government. I don't know what this person is doing to offset their income. That's more than 20. Well, it's put on hold, so right
Well,
now it's not
it's-
moving forward.
It's,
We are moving up what is included in this budget. We'd be happy to provide some more information. Some of the potential funding we're still seeing.
So roughly, we're paying that firm $156,000 a year. No? Well, unless I can't add or subtract. How much?
I'm sorry.
And so it is under $30,000 a year. I think it's right around 25,000 a year, not a month.
We certainly believe that specific number, but I will say it's
I kind of like to see a report out as we move forward, maybe once a quarter, as to if anything's coming in based on this organization. Because I want to see something for the money that we spent. And if we're not getting anything, if we get 1 or 2 items in 5 years, to me, that's not worth the money, because we're paying them and they're just getting the money back for something that we got one time.
if I might clarify, the park grant that we had in the process,
And I understand that, but I understand the demographics of where we are here in the Central Valley versus possibly being in the Bay Area on the coastal area, which are areas that are more prone to get money from Sacramento. So again, for me, I want to see the possibility, the way out of what we're paying versus what we're getting in the long term. So we've been doing this, 3 years now? How long has it been?
I think it's probably
3 years? Yeah, okay. So,
we can certainly.
yeah, and I at this point, it may not be a weighing point, but I think maybe a couple of years down the line, if we're not seeing anything else happening for us, and that this corporation or organization is not showing that their money is, they're carrying their weight for us, then that's something I think I'd like to reconsider. Okay, thank you.
okay. Here, try this.
Okay, so then we also have,
miscellaneous equipment, and the miscellaneous equipment, we just talked about that, now the camera project, we have communications equipment, which is, to finish the phone system. We
We did phase one of the phone system, which was City Hall and Fire, or Police. We still need to do Fire, Public Works, and the outlining offices, so we can all be on the same phone system. We're currently on 2 separate phone systems. So the increase is there, but it's also a carryover from the prior year. Again, that project was put on hold due to the circumstances of COVID.
I have a question. Miscellaneous equipment, does that include the sprucing up of our security system with our little?
What it includes is the point-to-point, which is the internet, putting us all on one system, and then it includes a citywide camera project, and the
Gotcha.
camera project or things that might be on a utility pole on a corner, things like that. We have a little bit of the cameras over here on I Street.
Yes.
It's to expand that.
Gotcha. Where would those fall in, or am I getting ahead?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, where would that fall in, where we were sprucing up our security system for the breach that happened?
Oh, okay. That would fall under the IT budget.
Gotcha.
And we've done a lot of that. So a lot of that's under the professional services for IT, because it might be services that we currently have with Mid Valley IT. So they can continue on our cybersecurity and backup and things like that. So the backup's no longer on a laptop, it's on a server, and the server is encrypted, protected, and we have more than one in various locations. That way, if something happens to one, it happens to the other one. So the ongoing cost of that is in professional services in the IT budget.
Okay, thank you.
Are we going to review the City Hall plexiglass later?
We are, when we get to the special revenue funds.
Okay,
We'll
okay, all right.
we'll get there. It's not in general fund.
All right.
So let's, we did remove replacing the expedition. So we had in the budget for this current year $45,000 to replace the expedition. It was one of the capital items that we removed because of the circumstances, and that's still, we're not moving forward with that. So we've still temporarily removed that out of the budget. So that's part of the decrease. And then one of the major things that you'll see throughout all the different budgets is that we decreased travel and training. It's one of the easiest expenses. Unfortunately, it's not always good because staff does get a lot out of attending these different training conferences, but we did make cuts to almost everybody's budget. Unless it was a mandatory training that we had to have, then it was usually cut from the budget. So in the general fund alone, we cut the budget by $7,000. Community and Economic Development, they have an increase of $125,000. That increase is due to costs, again, that are beyond our control, like salaries and benefits, insurance costs, technical services. These are costs associated with contracts that we already had in place, so we're not going back on the contracts. We're moving forward with these items. We have decreased their travel and training budget, and I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, but they're on page 43. Sorry, we're going to skip around because it's by department. So
That's
it's by
okay.
department,
Yeah.
and then it's by fund. So we might be going back and forth in the budget. But they are on page 43 for the general fund. And their technical services, you see that large increase, and that's the general plan update that I talked about before. And also, you'll see a decrease to travel and training by about $5,000. So we're limiting travel and training, and that's mainly going to affect the Planning Commission. They go to a league conference every year. We're going to cut back on that temporarily. And then another decrease that you'll see is there was a part-time person in that budget, and we are permanently, we're eliminating that person for this fiscal year. If something changes, we could always build it back in, but at this time, we're eliminating that cost. Moving on to police, which, let me get that page for you, page 63. Police, we have a $734,000 increase, and that again is for salaries, benefits, insurance, and recruitment. So the reason recruitment costs have gone up is because if you remember, we added money to the budget last year to outsource our background checks, and that allows us to get them done in a timely fashion and free up our officers and our sergeants to do other things that we need them to do here without having to do the background checks. So we increased the budget by that, which also helps lower our overtime. Carry forward is the communications, which again is part of the phone system. And then, as is normal with other budgets, we decreased their travel and training. The next budget is code enforcement, which begins on page 75. And there were no major changes to this department, so it's just basically a carry forward from last year, increasing both salaries and benefits and liability insurance.
At some point, I don't know when it's appropriate, but I want to talk about code enforcement and making sure that from a point forward, time certain that we're going to have, if the council supports this, weekend code enforcement on Saturday and Sunday for every weekend.
You want to do that later, now? The chief would be happy to discuss that right now.
Yes, yeah, why don't we do that?
Yeah, so we haven't had an opportunity to talk to our staff about this. And so that's one of the elements that you have to overcome and work through when you're making changes like this. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but what we're going to accomplish with code enforcement in the coming weeks is a transition so that we do have code enforcement on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday. I want to say this too publicly because this is a public meeting, but the goal is to concentrate their effort so that we have one person who works longer on the weekends. In other words, their shift's going to be a little bit longer than the 8-hour day. So, but that's the goal. And the city manager, Terrazas, and I just discussed that today, and we should be able to move forward with that in the next couple days. Next couple weeks. So I foresee it happening anytime soon now. But the goal is to do 10 to 11 hours of code enforcement on Saturday and Sunday moving forward. Let's say that one more time.
Their hours would be reduced during the week time to compensate that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the struggle we have, is that there's not enough I'd love to do more code enforcement, more animal control. It's just that we're limited by 40 hours a week.
So their job then would be to chase the concrete trucks around on Saturdays and Sundays? I'm just being facetious. So
Yeah,
you
we
don't, so you
can
don't
do
have
it at-
illegal, so you don't have illegal curb cuts like we have
Oh,
curb
yes.
cuts and things?
Yeah,
Thanks.
we can chase around anything that you see.
I'm just
Gotcha.
having a little levity here.
Probably the, illegal businesses that have set up on the weekend knowing we don't have anybody out there and they haven't pulled any city license to do so. We see them popping up a lot.
Yeah, we'll be able to address those.
And the construction.
Mr. Jones?
Oh, we're good.
Okay,
You nailed it right there.
thank you.
Of course.
And if I'm just going to make this blank statement, and if it hampers the weekday, then we have to bring this back to the council level and talk about code enforcement during the week too, to see what we can do, because we certainly don't want to hamper the weekday activities, but it's imperative that we have code enforcement on the weekend, and the longer hours is very refreshing to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, that's,
Well,
Go ahead.
That might be a situation where we need to look at the budget again to make sure that we have ample code enforcement for the weekend. And if necessary, that it needs to go into the weekday, how we're going to adjust that to make sure we have enough staff.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis.
If I may ask, currently, how many code enforcement, strictly code enforcement do we have currently on staff?
you can put me on the spot. We have 4 code enforcement officers, but one of them is assigned to animal control.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Of course.
Any more questions for the chief?
Just one comment if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I absolutely understand this is a priority for the council. The chief, commander, and I were discussing this very issue earlier today, so it's a work in progress. I think when we come back with the budget for the next round, we can more fully flesh that out. And as we move forward, look at how it works in certain providers
Thank you so much.
So Alex, when you say the next round, what is that anticipated date?
The next budget hearing on the 17th.
Yeah, so we'll have the adoption hopefully on June 17th, and then probably after the first quarter, we'll bring an update to council just so they know if we're status quo, if revenues are coming in higher than expected or lower than expected.
Just make sure that you tickle your calendar to stick that one on there for us.
We
Okay.
will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilman.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to fire, which begins on page 119 for the general fund. We are anticipating a $40,000 decrease, and that's in part to fleet repair and maintenance. So this year, we spent about $65,000. That was normal upkeep for items, but in addition to that, we did have a major repair on one of the engines. So we're not carrying that money over, and we don't anticipate that expenditure for the future year. So we're decreasing that number back down to about $23,000, which is more in line with what we've spent in past years. Another decrease would be the travel and training that I talked about. Normally, we budget around $11,000 in that account, but we're budgeting about $5,000 this year. And part of that is just the overall cuts that I talked about, but also it's more in line with what we've spent in prior years for the mandatory items.
But it has nothing to do with compromising fire training, right?
No, nothing at all. Anything
Okay.
that's mandatory is still in there.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do with people requesting to go to school. So as you know, part of our program is that if somebody's enrolled in college and it's approved by staff, that they get a $3,000 reimbursement. So maybe those haven't been turned in yet.
Okay.
However, those are items that we are also mandated to pay. So if somebody brings that in and it qualifies as a reimbursable expense, then we'll come back at a later date and add that to the budget. But for
Excellent.
right now, we're not anticipating those increased costs.
Okay. All right.
And then carry forward for the communication, same thing that I mentioned before, the phone project. Streets is on page 151. And even though streets is a general fund department, we are fortunate at this point in time that we still charge out the cost to other departments. So it's paid by gas tax and things like that. As long as gas tax remains consistent, then we can continue to do this. If it becomes lower than anticipated, then unfortunately this might start being a cost to the general fund. But at this point in time, the entire general fund or the entire street budget is $2.3 million, and we're able to cost that out to different funds right now. So streets, what we see here, the increases that we have here are again salaries, benefits, and insurance. Decreases are fleet repair, maintenance, travel, and training, and then they have the same increase, which would be the carry forward for communications. Recreation. So recreation has an increase of $44,000, and this, this begins on page 191. And what I'd really like to mention about recreation is we built this budget as though everything is right in the world and we can have recreation programs. And that's why there's an increase to the budget. We have the employees that are currently on furlough are built into this budget because as soon as we can bring them back, we would like to bring them back. And as soon as we can start programs back up, we would like to start those programs back up. So we built that budget with that in mind. Again, you're going to see the constant increases and decreases are constant. They're consistent throughout the budget because it's a rollover budget, because it's a carry forward budget. So there's really not much to talk about on that. We have all the same programs built in there and all the same people built in there, and the slight increases because of the normal costs that have to go up. Maintenance budget, same. Salaries and benefits, insurance, those are slight increases. The decreases because normally we try to build in equipment needs into this, but we did back that out. So the department asked for an aerial boom truck. The cost of that was $200,000, and most of that goes to the general fund, and so it was backed out. we're not saying that you can't have it, we're saying you can't have it today. So this is one of the things that when we bring the budget back to you on a quarterly basis, we will analyze and say, okay, the money's coming in better than anticipated, let's go ahead and put that boom truck back in the budget. So these are items that we're looking at. Same with part-time. There is a position in this budget that was eliminated. So if that's something we can bring back in the future, then we will. That was at a cost of $19,000. So that's a quick overview of the general fund. The revenues that we're anticipating bringing in, again, are $16.5 million. The expenditures going out are $16.5 million with a little bit of a savings there of $86,000 surplus. Again, the best practices for using our reserves are for one-time capital purchases and not for ongoing costs. And it's also good for assigning the funding like we have in the past for those capital purchases or for equipment needs, or even for the PERS savings pot that we set aside that has $2 million in it. So we're in a good position right now, even with the cutbacks that we made and even with the anticipated loss to revenues, we still have an operating surplus. That is beyond good for our city. We have a little bit of the cushion before we hit the fund balance. We don't want to hit the fund balance unless we absolutely have to. So if our revenues are coming in really short, then we'll have a different discussion about making further cuts or eating into the fund balance. But at this time, we don't have to have that discussion because we do have that operating surplus of $86,000.
Mr. Mayor, just one comment. That line, on that one-line chart, for me, is getting a little too close. So, which is why we will very closely monitor revenues through the coming months. Just echoing some of your remarks, we're in a good position now, but that, for me, that one is too close. That's all.
So I'm going to make a comment, if I may, thanking the citizens of Los Banos, because without Measure PAK and without Measure H, I think we would not be in the shape that we're in. And so thank you to the citizens of Los Banos, because we're going to get through these times. But I'll tell you, the reason we're getting through these times is through your generosity. Thank you.
Absolutely. And in addition to what Alex said, he's right. It's a little too close for comfort. And I think the only reason that it's a little more comfortable is because of the circumstances right now. We're taking a hit. We're not sure how bad the hit is going to be. We're anticipating it to be bad enough, but unfortunately it can get worse. And it's very positive that we're still in the black here. So even though it is too close for comfort, under the circumstances, it's not a bad position to be in.
And so you're talking about where it intersects at the end of the fiscal year?
Yeah, all the
2020,
way at the
21?
end of the chart, right here on the right
Yeah,
side. Those
yeah.
two are practically touching because the surplus is only $89,000.
Okay.
So if you go back to this chart here, you could see that, you know, we're bringing in 16.58 and we're sending out 16.49. That's really close for comfort.
I'll take the 86.
Yeah.
Surplus that's not a surplus.
So moving on to the general fund. Again, this is very conservative. It's basically built the same as it was last year, with the exception of some large equipment purchases that we made. So police, their share is 45% or 1.1 million. What that buys us is 6 police officers. Good news is 4 of those positions are currently filled. We have 2 unfilled positions and 1 unfunded sergeant, which we might be turning around for the next time that we meet in 2 weeks. Because we're so close to filling those positions, the caveat was we wouldn't fund that sergeant position until we had the personnel in Measure H. But we're getting there where we need that sergeant position. So we're considering funding that for the July 1st date, and we'll bring that back at the June 17th meeting.
And how many vacancies do we have for funded positions other than Measure H?
So we have, currently for police officers, we have 4 vacant positions. They're all funded. The only unfunded police position that we have is this one here, the sergeant position. All of our positions for sworn officers are funded. We do have a funded admin clerk position in police. It's funded, but it's not filled. So it's just a temporary hold. It's one of the items that we did in phase 2 in lieu of a furlough. That position wasn't filled, so we just are holding it and we're not filling it. It's funded but not filled. So technically, the only unfunded position that we have is the sergeant position, and we're looking to change that in the next meeting.
And we're super close to filling those 4 positions.
Yeah, we do have people in background to fill those 4 positions, but we do also have promotions coming up. So if we have this sergeant, that would ultimately be a promotion to somebody, which means then we would have another officer position to
So we could be
fill.
at 100% funded and Measure H really soon?
Yes. 100% filled positions.
We haven't
seen that in a very long time.
We haven't seen that in a long time.
Correct.
Go ahead and press your button, Brett. It should come right on.
It's on.
So where are our stats at?
Oh, it's off now.
Our police department, those numbers that I was asking for a while back.
We were looking at adding all the funding sources like you and I discussed, Measure P, the CFD, so we were working on putting that together, and I apologize for not having that. If the chief wants to, if you're interested, maybe the chief could provide an update on where we are in terms of vacancies, if there's any other questions.
Because from what it sounds like is that we're really close to filling all our staffing positions for PD, but the impression that I've had for years is that we were really low still for what we should be at. So maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's just to go back a little bit, pre-recession 2008, 2009, we had 48 sworn police officers. We were on the verge of getting to about 50, but we just never quite got there. So I think we were at 48 was our maximum. Recession came, we went down fairly significantly, and I don't recall that number, but I want to say 38 was the maximum number of authorized and sworn positions that we had for a very long time. Over the years since the recession, we've started to build back up. We've brought in more code enforcement, we've brought in more dispatchers, we've added sworn. And so we got to 41 positions as of the time Measure H passed. When Measure H passed, we also got the additional 7 positions. So we are technically back up to 48 positions. So with the recruitments that we're talking about now, with the unfilled positions and the vacancies that we have right now, we're only 4 away from being at 48, which is really exciting. The only caveat is there's a few officers that are out because of injuries. We got into a scuffle at Circle K the other day, and one of our officers went down with a back problem, but that's a minor thing. He should be back fairly soon. And the other caveat is that the training process for some of the individuals, some of the trainees that we have takes 6 months in the academy, and then there's another 4-month period where they are on training on the road. So, for example, we have 2 cadets that started the academy in Stockton on June 1st. And so they will be in the academy until about December, and then 4 months after that, they'll actually be on the road by themselves. Knock on wood that they pass successfully through all those training requirements. With the 4 unfilled positions that we do have, as I forget who made the statement, we are in a current recruitment process. We're in the background phase with 4 applicants. We just hired 3 today at our swearing ceremony. We actually have 6 in training right now. So it's a positive time. It's taken us a while. There's ebbs and flows, just like there is in all recruitment and all personnel issues, and I'm sure every jurisdiction, but we seem to be on the increase. It just takes time to get them through the training process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand that. You know, it just seems like we haven't increased our police force out there for our size. It is on. It just seems like we haven't increased our police force for the size of our community. I mean, if I'm correct, we're still at 3 beats for our size of town. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 4. I think both of our day shifts now are operating with 4 beats during the, no, I take that back. 1 is 4 beats and a sergeant, 1 is 3. Our graveyards and our swings are a combination because they overlap a majority of their shift. They go as high as 4, but then sometimes they're as low as 2 police officers and a sergeant between certain hours of the night.
Okay, with like the events that we've had this past week, I mean, it's just been chaotic. I mean, should we be pushing our goals up there for more personnel, more patrol, more officers in there?
I
More
think it's
support
our,
for the guys. I mean, I know we had 2 guys that we sent off to San Francisco, and that's just 2 less
yeah,
out
so,
here. And this is, I mean, and that happened while everything randomly happened this past week. So
yeah, mutual aid is a thing that we participate in all year round. Some cases we send people out, but I would say a majority of our mutual aid are people coming into our community, assisting us with investigations. For example, because of these acts of violence, we have our sheriff department is bringing in 4 to 5 deputies 3 nights a week, about 10 hours a night. For the commitment I have from the sheriff himself is until we don't need him anymore. The example of the march that we had the other day, where we had the march out in the lobby and out in the parking lot. I think we had 18 to 20 sheriff's deputies here. So it goes both ways, but I think in a majority of the cases where we have mutual aid requests, we definitely are on the receiving end more than we.
Receiving end, okay.
Yeah. The other interesting part to that now I've lost my train of thought, that OES request that we sent 2 officers to in San Francisco was specifically for the protests that were going on. Those 2 exact same officers were part of our team that encountered and worked with the parade that was here. So they came in with a lot more experience. The environment in San Francisco was multiple times worse than what they experienced here. And so it was a lot easier for them to adapt and maintain professionalism because they've been through it. They're trained. That's a great experience for them. So that's the other reason why we like to participate in mutual aid requests like that. Yeah. The timing on that one was terrible though, because the homicide case that we had, the unfortunate case that we had on 152, those guys had just hit the ground in San Francisco and were on patrol. So at the time there'd only been 1, and it was a 2-day commitment. And had that timing been differently, we would have said, hey guys, time out. I'm gonna have to cancel you.
and that's
So-
the thing with crime is we can never predict it. I mean, if we
Yeah.
could predict it, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
we'd be years ahead of everybody else. But that's why we need to push hard to get these cameras going, and
Yeah.
that way we can start solving some of these cases out there.
Yeah, we're actually working, I won't say, but we're working on our organizational chart. And when you get to the point where you've got 48 sworn police officers working in the field, Ray, Jason, and I, the sergeants, we get excited because we haven't been there in years, and we're going to be able to do things that we haven't done in years. And so it's an exciting time for us. We just got to get there.
So just to be clear, so the police share of 2021 of Measure H is 1.125 then?
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
So working off of what Brett's saying is we would love to add more positions overall to the city. But as you could see, we don't have the revenue sources to do that. We don't have the funding available to do that. And that's why, yes, Measure P is fantastic. Measure H helped us enormously, adding 7 positions to just the police staffing, including the officers and the sergeants. But you could tell by the surplus, it's about $100,000 for a police officer. So that's not, counting when they get to top step or if they become a sergeant, it's $100,000. So right now, looking at the general fund, if we added 1 position, we would automatically be eating away at our fund balance because you saw that we had an operating surplus of $89,000. We add that 1 officer, and now we have a deficit. Here you're looking at Measure H, excuse me. If you look at your screen, you can see that the surplus, the operating surplus for this year is anticipated to be $222,000. And that is mostly because we don't have that sergeant position filled in there. So we plug that sergeant position in there, and now that $220,000 goes to probably about $75,000. So but we're not necessarily including all the costs that are associated with him. We're including salary and benefits, but not equipment and things like that. So that's going to make that number even less. So, yes, Measure H was a blessing in disguise because it allowed us to throw all these positions into the general fund, and that was our revenue source, Measure H. But we're really tight, or we need a new revenue source. We need our sales tax revenue to increase and not decrease. Sales tax revenue combined with property tax revenue, it makes up 79% of the city's general fund budget. That's huge. If we take a hit to either one of those, we're in a bad situation. If we take a hit to both of those, like we did in 2008, we're in a very, very bad situation. So, we've always been conservative since the last recession in 2008, and we've slowly built up. We gave ourselves a cushion, and we add things when we know that we can sustain them and not that we're paying them out of a pot of money that's set aside or might be one-time money. So when the revenues come in to offset that expense, then yes, we can add. If they don't come in, then it's really not fiscally responsible for us to be adding ongoing costs, whether it's a person or some kind of contract or a maintenance agreement that is ongoing that we don't technically have the revenue source to support. So that's what stops us from getting back to our 2008 numbers. Not only that, but we see revenues coming in at the same or higher rate as we did in 2008, but we also see expenditures have grown at a higher rate than the revenues have. So we might have been paying about 25% for PERS costs back then, but now we're at 45%. You used to be able to take a salary. If you paid somebody $50,000, you can cut that in half and say their benefits would cost $25,000. So if you pay somebody $50,000, then their full cost is $75,000. Now you have to say if you pay them $50,000, it costs another $50,000 for benefits. So, it's at about 100% of their salary costs. So, our expenses are going up a lot faster than our revenue sources are coming in. And so that's why we're hesitant to add new positions.
I remember that 2008 night along with Mr. Faria. And we were the lone two votes to not cut officers after listening to everything. And it was still a mistake in 2008.
Yeah, it was a slash and burn
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah,
Instead of a judicious, but,
and that
Thank
doesn't
God we're
apply
where we
to
are
anyone
now.
here because you weren't here. But I'll tell you right now, that's a decision that I made to not cut, and I still feel good that I voted not to cut. And I think, Mr. Faria, how about you?
absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'll never reduce. Thank you.
So going back to Measure H on police, this will look a little bit different. I'm thinking when we bring it back on June 17th, because we'll probably fund that sergeant position because we're so close to having full staffing in Measure H for police.
And then we'll go back, and then if it's a move up, then we'll still have the 6 police officer positions.
Yes, you'll still have
Okay,
the 6
okay.
positions
I just want to be
filled.
clear. So 7 total.
That's correct.
All right, okay.
You'll see an increase for supplies and services under recruitment, and that's just obviously because we're still staffing and filling these positions. And then the capital outlay there of $30,000 is for a gun and ammunition program. It's 55 guns. We just want to make sure that we stay on a replacement program. So that's plugged into here as well. And just a reminder, the surplus, so if there's any surplus in any of these Measure H budgets, it doesn't go into one big pot. It stays to whoever it's for. So this surplus here of $222,000 can only be spent on police and police activities that are approved by both council and possibly recommended by the Measure H committee.
Okay.
Measure H, again, for dispatch, that's 10% of the budget. And we have 1 dispatcher and 1 CSO or community service officer paid out of this, and both positions are currently filled. Filling those positions with all the salaries and benefits and supplies that are related to them leave a surplus of $50,000 for the year. There was something that the chief had built in the budget, which is a replacement for the IREMS project. However, we're a little bit hesitant again because we're not sure about the economic downturn. It's a one-time cost of $30,000, but it's the ongoing cost that we're concerned about. So until we're comfortable that we have that revenue source a little bit more stabilized, we won't build that project back in there. And that's why you do see that surplus there. Code enforcement, that's 5%. That pays for one code enforcement officer, and that position is currently filled, and that's a pretty tight budget. As you can see, we bring in about $125,000 and leaves us a surplus about $33,000. This surplus is also good because if there is an economic downturn and we have a cushion, then we're not necessarily laying that person off immediately. Fire is 15%, and that funds 2 firefighter positions. Those positions are also currently filled. The reason for the large surplus here is because Chief Hurley had budgeted to replace the SCBA's, and that's out of a cost of about $100,000. But again, I keep on repeating myself because of the economic uncertainty. We pulled that out of the budget. We'll build it back in if the funding is coming in, and then you'll have a surplus of about $38,000. He does generally replace those or update those at the end of the year. So we did just get some in for this current fiscal year. So we're in a good position to know if can we just push this out a little bit further for the year.
And
Deborah,
fire
did you
has
have?
everything it needs to be safe though, right?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
We do not
Okay.
withhold anything that's mandatory
All
for personnel safety. Okay, and then finally, we have Parks and Recreation, and they're at 15%. And then if you remember, there's a prevention program that's at 5%. And so we're combining those two because those efforts are basically under recreation. So that's for a total of $500,000. We do have a recreation coordinator that is paid out of this budget. Again, we funded them as though they're working, but unfortunately, they're currently furloughed. But they are built in the budget to bring back at any time. Supplies and services, that includes facility maintenance, and that is for fertilizer system at Olivera Park, Ranchwood and College Greens. The buildings need painting, so that's included in here. And then just regular maintenance of parks and light repair at a cost of $10,000. Under professional services, which is included in the supplies and service category, we have several programs built into Measure H. And as you remember, that's basically what Measure H was for, so we can expand our recreation program. And some of those include spring and youth soccer, spring and youth, or spring youth flag football, fall and summer volleyball, summer youth basketball, adult soccer, adult softball, various other sports activities, and then legal expenses associated with those programs. And those are basically so we can write contracts, liability, things like that. And those programs, again, are all built in here, and we'll start up. Right now, we're anticipating that nothing will begin before Mark just sent something out today that says all programs are canceled through July. Even if the governor says, yes, it's okay today to start programs back up, it's going to take the recreation department a little bit of time to get going. So that's probably about a month out. So if we started programs today and we brought people back today, it would probably take about a month to 6 weeks to actually get those items back up and running. It wouldn't be overnight. We wouldn't have volleyball the very next day. So those are things we're taking into consideration as well. About timing, of course, we're constantly monitoring it, and we'd like to bring them back sooner or later, but unfortunately, we just can't at this point in time. Special departmental expenses, those are costs associated with the grants. So they're looking at applying for different grants, and there are some statewide grants, some rural recreation grants, and these are just the costs that are associated with them. Sometimes we can build them back into the grant depending on what the language is for admin fees in that grant. And then the capital outlay is for park and playground equipment, and that's at Talbot Park. They're doing a slide repair over there. And then we also put a turf aerator in there. Oh my goodness, how do you say that? Thank you. They said it, I'm not going to repeat it. For $38,000 for that. So again, this budget is built out as though we're moving forward with our recreation programs. You're going to make me repeat it? I couldn't pronounce it the first time. It's a turf aerator. There we go. I said it.
You put holes in the lawn. Is this the time to talk about a splash park or later on?
That's in a different, that's coming up. That's in a
Okay,
different
all right.
fund.
Okay. Well,
So I'm glad to hear we're getting an aerator. And I'm gonna go back a couple of years where I'd gotten some free product from Ewing to put down on our lawns to, it creates a gel effect in the root of the grass, and when you're watering, it holds it in there longer so that your turf is not drying out. And certainly, you know, in some of the smaller parks in my area, once we get that aerator, I'd be happy to try to work to either get some more from Ewing or purchase it for the city so that the grass doesn't die. But I'm really happy to hear that we've gotten that aerator for our turf.
I thought you wanted to drive the aerator. I was worried.
No, it's
Okay.
it's a little machine that you stand in front of it and plucks holes in the ground,
Right.
and you put fertilizer and all kinds of other things in there to save your greenery.
So our revenues for Measure H, we're anticipating to bring in 2.5 million, expend 1.8 million, which leaves us for a surplus of $672,000. And as I previously mentioned, those can only be spent on the department that the expenditure plan says they're for. And again, that surplus is there because we're being conservative and some of these items might be built back in at a later date. So moving on to special revenue funds. There are several special revenue funds throughout the budget. There's a lot of information in here that we're not touching on. There are some things like grants that we don't necessarily budget for until they've been rewarded to us, and so we won't have those in there. You might see zeros in some of these pages now. So I'm just really going to touch on the departments that have activity in there. So if you have any questions about anything else, feel free to ask or these. But starting on page 27, this is capital improvement, which are also impact fees for City Hall. This is where the City Hall remodel project comes into play that the mayor mentioned previously. We're anticipating our revenue decreasing. These revenue decreases are based on permits. So if less houses are being built, then we're bringing in less impact fees. So we estimate at a lower rate. There are certain, when we do the capital improvement plan, there are specific projects that we state that will impact the city, and therefore these funds can be expended for these projects, and one of them is City Hall. As the city grows, City Hall needs to expand, so that's why these monies are collected. Remodel fits into that, especially because we're remodeling to fit people in the area better, expand out, things like that. So we did have this project included for the 1920 year. It was put on hold because of the circumstances. We included phase 1 and phase 2 of the project. Phase 1 of the City Hall remodel are the counters that the mayor's referring to, and that is we have the plexiglass up there now. It'll look a lot like that, but it'll be safety glass. It'll be ballistic proof glass, and it's for the safety of the customers. The plexiglass is up there obviously right now because of COVID. We did that when we first did the shutdown. So it'll be that, and we are asking for phase 1 to move forward in the 2021 fiscal year. Phase 2 and phase 3 are still on hold. Phase 2 is remodeling the finance HR side of the building. That's replacing all the cubicles, and we've crammed more people in the area. The cubicles, if you've been through there, they're all misshaped and missized. So some of them are extremely large and some of them are extremely small. They'll all be standard so we can fit more people in there comfortably and better utilize the space. Phase 3 is just the other side. So the economic community and economic development side, same thing, just make it more efficient. More people, same amount of room. So this money can only be spent for these types of items. It's not money that can be utilized for employees. So spending this money is not a bad thing. It's more of a perception thing. One, you don't want to be remodeling City Hall if you have people on work furlough. So it's more of a perception, and we choose to back such items out because of perception. And in this case, we're backing it out because we just can't have construction going on with COVID. So that's another reason that the phase 2 and phase 3 are on hold. Phase 1 is considered a safety issue, and that's why we're asking to move forward with that. And we did just plug in a $35,000 cost in there. That's just to get us through professional services RFPs, things to the architect to design things out. And then when the real cost comes in, it will be brought back to council at that time.
So what's our timeline on this?
We actually have an estimate right now just for the architect part, but we haven't signed off on that. Therefore, we haven't moved forward enough to know what our timeline would be. Our Assistant Public Works Director is working on that, but we're waiting for approval on, did you have something to say? I'm sorry.
One thing, it's not only the plexiglass, it's making the counters ADA accessible, which is a readjustment of the counters, which will take a little while. So once we get on, probably looking at a 3-month window for design.
All right, thank you.
So Sonia, is there anything in that budget for the dais?
So no, there's not currently anything in the budget for the dais. We did talk about chairs. I know that you've requested that the chairs be replaced. These are generally items that we would look at the end of the year. If there's a little bit of a surplus in an account, then we would look at replacing something like that. So if it's something that we can do, we can look at it, or it could be something specifically built into the budget.
Okay, well, at some point, I'd like the item to be looked at as putting it in the budget, because we've replaced some chairs in the dais, but these have been up here since dinosaur ages. And, you know, for me, I find it hard to sit up straight in these chairs, and they're uncomfortable. So I think it's time, you know, maybe this year we can't do it, but I think it's time to put it in the budget and not just look at the fact that we'll slip it in if we have extra money. If we can remodel stuff, and I know the staff needs it, but don't neglect your council, you know, to make things comfortable for them. I realize that we just sit here once every 2 weeks, but again, I remember sitting in these chairs back in 1998. That's a long time.
Right, I understand. So replacing the chairs is not something that we could use capital improvement plan money for. That would be more of a general fund expense. Because the way you're paid, it can also get used out of enterprise funds. So what we would need to do is a price quote just to look at how much does it actually cost to replace the chairs. Is there funding? Maybe there's a surplus from something else this year and we could pick it up. If not, then we can possibly see about building it back into the
Well, let's
budget.
get a price quote.
Yes,
All right,
I can do that, no problem.
get the price quote and bring it to us. Okay. All right, why don't we take, Sonia, you've been talking, your voice needs a rest. Not that I can tell that, but I just want to give you a rest for a few minutes. Let's take about a 10-minute break and we'll come back.
Okay. Can you turn off all the microphones, please?
I'm trying, and it's not working. You're still on. Brett, would you push your button for me, please? Yeah, I got yours. It's still on. Okay, let me get there we go.
20 more slides.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. And Sonia, if you'd like to continue?
Okay, so moving on to Measure P, Police, that begins on page 91. This is for the future funding of the new police department. So if you remember, we purchased the land just recently, and so we're going through the next steps to get the architect up and understand how much money it's going to cost us. There will be a couple different options that go into how we're going to build that out. Mark just talked about it at the council meeting before last. So funding is available in here to move forward with those. No, I'm sorry, funding is not in Measure P, but Measure P will be utilized to pay however we decide to finance it. So whether it's bond payments or some other sort of financing, this money will be used for that. And we do have an ending fund balance of approximately $4.9 million. What else this fund is used for is for personnel and for equipment needs, which include the MDCs so that are in all the cars. And so we not only may replace MDCs throughout the year, but it's for upkeep of the equipment as well, upkeep, maintenance, and the wireless services that they have. This is a good one. Again, we want to see a surplus there so we can utilize any of that money to help us pay down the future police station. Capital improvement for police. Now, this is where we actually funded the land purchase out of, and this is where we'll be funding the continued professional services. So anything architect or funding goes into it. We set aside $400,000 for that phase of the project. And again, this is improvement fees, so capital improvement fees, or they're also called impact fees. This is based on permits, like I talked about with the city hall fees. If permits decrease, then the capital improvement fees will go down as well. So we see that slight decrease of $315 million, and we see that large decrease in expenditures. That's because purchasing that land cost us $1.4 million, and we're only anticipating spending out about $400,000 for the current projects that we have. But we do have a fund balance of $2.4 million, and that can also be utilized to help pay down any bonds that we might have for building the station or professional services that are tied to building that station as well. Measure P Fire. So Measure P Fire, we purchased a training tower this year out of the Measure P funds. That was one of the things that was built into the original expenditure plan. So the tower is here and ready to be installed. Again, due to COVID, we haven't done the installation, but we are building that into this Measure P budget, and that's at a cost of about $388,000. But that's what that fund balance is supposed to be utilized for. After we do that project, we'll have a fund balance of approximately $880,000, and that will be utilized for any future equipment purchases in relation to building a new fire station. So Alex mentioned before when he was talking about the lobbyists that they did help us get that $5 million to build that new fire station. This money can also be utilized to help with the funding of the new fire station. Capital outlay or capital improvement for fire. This again is impact fees, and we did build in the purchase of a new fire engine into this account. So we'll be replacing one of the current engines. The cost of that with not only the fire engine, but all the equipment that we need to stock that fire engine is approximately $545,000. After we spend that money, then we will have a fund balance of $1.2 million. And again, this is also funding that can be utilized to help build a new fire station.
Will this be retiring any fire equipment, or will this be an addition to our current fleet?
It semi-retires equipment, so it'll be there in the background in case of an emergency if we needed it. If we built out the other station, it could be used to expand the services over there. So it's technically still there, but it won't be utilized in the manner that the new one would be.
So still useful equipment, expands, and a backup at the
Correct.
same time?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Expenditures by department for park development. So this is the park fund. So these are impact fees as well. and it's what the developers pay in to help expand and maintain the current parks that we have. So if they put a new park in, when they come in, this money can be spent on those parks. So what we've included in the budget for the 2021 year, I just noticed a little error on there, excuse that, I should say 2021 instead of all those extra numbers. Professional services include a park master plan. So we talked a little bit about doing that before. The park master plan will help us to understand how we want to move forward with all of our parks. What are the projects? What are the things that we need to update? What are the things that we need to add? That park master plan is estimated to be $44,000. There's also professional services in here for a splash pad. And so that is for construction and design of a splash pad, not full construction. Because we've only set aside about $75,000 for the design of that right now. And then the capital outlay in park development also includes funding the dog park at $240,000. So as we talked about earlier, the dog park was originally supposed to be finished at the end of this current fiscal year. We weren't able to do that, and so we have funded it for next fiscal year. So we're hoping to move forward with that project. It will be funded as soon as July 1 if it's approved on the 19th. And we have to go back out because we did deny all bids. So we went out for an RFP. We had things come in, but because, again, of the circumstances, we denied the bids. We put it on hold. We have to go out to bid. There is a schedule that would move forward beginning in June if this was approved on June 19th. We would write the RFP, re-release the RFP, and then move forward with bringing that back to budget. The estimated cost of that dog park is $240,000. And then the final thing in capital outlay is to put in lights at the skate park, and that's a cost of approximately $10,500. This, again, is another budget that is meant for infrastructure and equipment needs. It is not something that we can pay employees. So yes, that money's there, and we're spending it for what we can utilize the money for. It cannot be utilized in any way to pay employees. Landscape and lighting project. Normally I go over all the different increases and decreases because we do that before the council meeting, but you guys approved all those last night, so we don't really need to go into that any further. What I just want to talk about tonight are some of the districts and what the increased expenses may be. So looking at Ranchwood, there are landscape and irrigation costs of approximately $50,000. And then also you see that there's a shade structure of $25,000. That's in Vineyards B in part of Ranchwood. Las Banos Creek Shopping Center, they'll improve the landscape along the highway, and that's behind the Taco Bell and Subway area over by Walmart. And that's at a cost of $15,000. And we're anticipating increasing Ronnie's contract services by the CPI for the year, which is 2.9%. Meadowlands has storm drain improvements of $10,000. Mission Estates has a park and playground equipment. It's actually a slide repair at Verona Park, costs $5,600. Northgate, you'll see an increase in that budget due to CPI increase for Ronnie's contract services. Stone Creek will be repairing irrigation and replacing landscaping at a cost of $35,000, and they also have a slight increase to their contract for CPI. All the other LLDs are in there. We just don't have major projects. It's just ongoing operations and maintenance costs. And then now we're at the enterprise funds. So this is water, sewer, garbage, and airport. We are not as conservative here because, again, these are business-like entities. We charge out exactly what we need to maintain infrastructure, equipment, personnel needs. So we can spend that money. We do anticipate reductions, but only because of things being closed. So we did have a few businesses that went ahead and turned off their water because their business was shut down, but very few. We have over 11,500 accounts total, including residential. We had a total of 8 people shut off their water due to COVID. Just because their business stopped didn't mean that they stopped doing things over there. So it wasn't that drastic of a hit, but we did take a hit in penalties and late fees because we're not charging them currently because we legally can't turn anybody off. So therefore, we can't obviously charge the fees. So that'll be changing. We can't go back to shutting people off until the stay-at-home order is lifted. Once that's lifted, we could shut people off. But now that we're open, we think it's more convenient for people to come in and pay. So late charges will probably be added back on, but that shut-off fee, admin fee of $50 will not until such time that we can go back to turning people's waters off for non-payment. Professional services, so we have a decrease of revenues of approximately $282,000. That is not just due to COVID. There's just a couple miscellaneous items and things that we don't normally collect, and so therefore we decreased it just to be conservative. Expenditures is an increase of $3 million. Anytime that we have a fund balance in these accounts, it's built up because the projects cost a lot of money, and so we have to build it up until we can afford to pay it. We try to avoid financing the best that we can. So some of the costs and reasons for that $3 million increase include chromium-6 testing, which is ongoing. We built in $125,000. The groundwater study is approximately $150,000. We have well 16 testing at $50,000 and a urban water management plan at $50,000. The land purchase for well 16 and the design is $900,000. Water master plan improvement, we've budgeted $1.9 million, and that's for several things, including upgrade to the water line encircling the fairgrounds. So it's C North, D 3rd, and F Street, and the approximate cost of that is $1.9 million. And then valve replacement, which is ongoing throughout the year, is $50,000. The fund balance in the water account after we do these purchases or improvements is $23 million. In addition to the infrastructure changes, we'll also be purchasing some equipment, which includes a forklift at $38,000 and a flatbed dump truck at $120,000.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is just for my education. When you were talking about the perimeter of the fairgrounds, did I hear you say that?
Yes, so
Okay.
that's the street surrounding the fairgrounds.
Okay.
That's where the project will be, or
Okay.
the suite, not in the fairgrounds, but the area surrounding the fairgrounds.
Okay, so there's sidewalk there, or I didn't know that, I thought the ground just kind of butted up to the street fair, the fairground itself. And maybe there are some areas where there's
I
sidewalks.
don't know if there's areas that there's sidewalks, but the water line replacement is in the actual street that they're doing.
Okay, all right.
Wastewater, or sewer, we're expecting a $800,000 decrease to revenues. I did forget to mention on water, even with that decrease, we built in a 2.9 Prop 218 increase that I discussed earlier. So just so you know, when we look at the revenues, that is included in this number. We did reduce connection fees for sewer. Again, if permits are going down, we're building less houses, then also connection fees would go down. So water connection fees would go down, sewer connection fees would go down. We don't have that revenue to generate if permits are going down. Yes, go ahead.
Should come on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
There you
fine,
go.
thank you. Just to mention one thing, just to let you know that well 16, that's the land purchase. So you see 23 million being carried over, but the next year we plan to actually build the well, put a 2.5 million gallon tank in next to the well and do the infrastructure to service that well. And all those together are in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 million. So you'll see an 8 to 10 million project in a year from now to do that well. So that 23 million that you see will go down, but that's what it was collected for, and that's a major need over there. We're having pressure issues as well as capacity issues, and this also takes our fire storage up to where it needs to be.
That's in the existing neighborhood?
No, that actually, well, currently we're trying to put it on the south side of Pioneer in county jurisdiction, which we're allowed to do, about 400 feet west of Ortigalita. So eventually our Pioneer Road expansion will go right in front of it. That's what we're trying to do because, a big tank isn't a very good thing to have in a neighborhood for looks.
That's okay. So going back to wastewater, so we'll have the decrease to revenues because of connection fees, and that's estimated to be about 230,000 less than the current year. But the major decrease here is we had a COP, which is like a bond, a certificate of purchase for some sewer work that we had done. And this current fiscal year, 1920, we actually just paid that off. So when you do something like that, they require you to set money in a fund, the amount of the payment. So they actually just gave us that money back, which was about $500,000. So that's why the revenue seems so high. That would fall under miscellaneous revenues, and we won't see that again next year. It's basically just accounted for in fund balance. So some of the expenses that we have and the reason for the $2.5 million increase include the land purchase of Nante's storm drain, and that's actually carryover from previous years. I believe we're still in negotiations. We've been looking at this for the past, I believe, 2 years, and so the 1.3 million is the carryover from the current fiscal year. We have storm drain improvements, west side pump, a storm pump for $30,000, master plan, which includes, here are my little notes, a rehab to Crest Hill Sewer Lift Station at $35,000, repair manholes near the wastewater treatment plant for $30,000, sewer line repair at State Route 165 and 152 to correct settling at a cost of $100,000, and potable water construction of $340,000. We are purchasing a 3/4 ton pickup truck and 2 mule ATVs at a cost of $15,000 each, and then a spray rig. I believe that was for the graffiti abatement. And with all these purchases, our remaining wastewater fund balance would be approximately $9.7 million at the end of the fiscal year. Airports. We have a slight increase in revenues, and that's mainly to the federal grant. We account for it annually, doesn't mean we get it. It's a reimbursable grant, so if we do the work, then they pay us back, but we account for it in case we might do the work. And so it's taken out of 1920 and added back into 2021, and that's why you see the increase of $100,000. Expenditures basically along the same lines because we put the revenue in there, we put the expenditure side in there. Also, we have a slight decrease to aviation fuel. It always costs a little bit more on an annual basis. So we're anticipating an increase of about $44,000, leaving our fund balance at about $560,000 at the end of the year. Solid waste. We have a revenue increase of approximately $293,000. We are building that 2.9% CPI increase in there. However, because it's a contract service, they also charge us a CPI increase. So they charge us 80% of whatever the CPI is for the year. So we'll pay our contract services an additional 80% of that 2.9% increase. So because of that, we've increased technical services to account for the CPI increase. We have the landfill closure at $1 million for design and construction. And again, that's the bottle dump located over on Mercy Springs. Hopefully we'll get that cleaned up and closed this year. And then the point-to-point system, part of this is expended out of all enterprise funds. This is the first time I mentioned it, but they are paying for a portion of that point-to-point system. We split $30,000 amongst the 3 different enterprise funds. And the end of the year fund balance for solid waste will be $7.2 million. So internal services funds are used to track personnel services and capital costs that shift between various departments. So the best example is IT. It's something that everybody uses. But the best way to split it up is just to start a budget for it and then disperse it amongst all the other budgets. So we also do that with OPEB cost and with fleet maintenance. So first looking at fleet maintenance, we are estimating a $893,000 budget for this current year and a $898,000. Again, we're being very conservative with our costs, so you'll see a slight increase of $5,000. We do have a slight increase of about 7% for the gasoline and oil. We did build some capital outlay projects into that budget. Apparently, they have a leaking roof out there, and so we're going to repair that leaking roof. And we'll be adding a concrete pad to the outdoor areas, my understanding, and that's so they can work on the larger vehicles like the fire vehicles, and they don't have to bring them inside the building. So the roof will cost approximately $20,000, and the concrete pad is only $5,000. There are currently 2 full-time employees paid out of that budget, and it did begin on page 33 if anybody wants to take a look at the budget. IT, or information technology, is on page 341 of the budget. We did back in October outsource our management portion of IT, and so we have a contract with Mid-Valley IT at approximately $11,000 per month to manage our IT department. There are some projects built into this budget, and this is pretty much a carryover and at the same time on hold budget, because there's $100,000 built in here to replace desktops and laptops, which is something we do on an annual basis. We want to check and make sure that the servers and storage are up to date and well maintained, as well as other software and hardware components. But it will be analyzed. It's here in the budget, but it'll be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So if the money is available for us to spend, then we'll go ahead and spend it. We have a little bit more control. There's things that we can do, like maybe a laptop in the community center is set to be replaced, but the necessity isn't there. So maybe we don't need to replace it right away. Maybe we need to swap it out with a higher priority laptop, something that's utilized on a daily basis. So we'll be looking at these things on a more conservative approach rather than, okay, we have 30 to replace, let's replace all 30 of them. So we'll be a little bit more conservative just because of resources. And then technical services include projects such as the upgrade to the internet services, which is the point-to-point, email security and monitoring. These are some of the things, Veronica, that you mentioned before about safety and cybersecurity and things like that. So those costs are still built into this budget, and we'll continue to make sure we maintain that. And so you see that slight decrease in the budget, and that's because we did lose that IT manager position. We eliminated that position and replaced it with the contract service position. So it's less for us to outsource that than it is for us to have somebody in-house. Okay, future challenges. So our future challenges right now are COVID-19. Even though we've budgeted the best we can, we are not out of the woods, and we are anticipating a further reduction in sales tax revenue. We have obviously a big reduction to our recreation because we're not allowed to have these programs. There's the continued reduction to enterprise funds, which I mentioned, not being able to shut people off, and there's costs that go along with that. And then, of course, we have an increase to expenditures, additional supplies that we have to purchase, additional things that we have to do. Obviously, we're funding masks now. We are sanitizing the lobby on a twice daily basis because we're back open and people are coming in. We've put plexiglass everywhere. If you took a walk through City Hall, all the cubicles that were open before now have plexiglass. That way we can maintain that social distancing, not only by the 6 feet, but also with a barrier. So there's all these additional costs, not only to City Hall, but different areas throughout the city. And also personnel costs have increased. We've had more overtime due to situations pertaining to COVID-19. So those are increased expenditures as well as decreased revenues. And then just in general, outside of COVID, we have rising personnel costs. So as you know, on an annual basis, health benefits are increasing. Pension, which is the CalPERS rates that I mentioned before, are increasing. Minimum wage is mandated to go up $1 this year, beginning January 1st, 2014. It'll rise to $14 an hour, and then again in 2022, it'll rise to $15 an hour. That's the cap. That is built into this budget as well. Any part-time personnel that remained in the budget will automatically get a $1 increase if they're at that $14. And we constantly monitor our other full-time employees as well to make sure they're not dropping below that rate. We don't have anybody at that minimum wage rate. Aging infrastructure is also a future challenge. We do have to construct the new police station, which is at a cost of about $25 million. In the past, we were short about $10 million for that project. With revenues coming in less, we haven't quite figured out a new number. We're anticipating it still to be around that point. And then, of course, there's always equipment needs. So there's fleet replacement that we don't want to get behind on. There's cars that we usually try to replace on an annual basis. That's one of the things that has taken a hit this budget. We're not replacing any police vehicles this year. Safety equipment, if it's mandated, if it's out of date, of course it's going to be replaced. But if it's extra above and beyond, then it might fall back. But we don't want to get too far behind on our equipment needs.
But my question is always, for the police vehicles that they have, are they in the shape that they need to be in order to protect everyone?
The police vehicles are not always in the best shape that they need to be in. We don't do cutbacks on safety of police officers.
Okay.
They might have additional miles and they might need to be retired, but we push it out a little bit further. So the commander likes to pick me up on the ones that need to be jump-started, and that's when we have a better discussion. So if it gets to that point, it's more of a priority, but mostly it's extending out the mileage on the vehicle.
Okay. but
And the
there's-
wear and tear. If you go in some of them, the seats are torn and things like that, but it's not safety.
But it's not safety, so we have safe vehicles for people to ride in?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And then technology needs as well. The IT things that I talked about, there might be some things that we fall a little bit behind on, but we don't want to get too far behind. So we just need to make sure that our priorities are in the right place and that we don't lose the sight of our infrastructure needs and our equipment needs when we're reducing the budgets.
Well, I'm on the RAN board, and we're doing that huge update with the computers. And that's really important to get the information to the officers.
Yes, definitely.
It's a fantastic system. So, thank you.
And then key elements of financial recovery. So as I mentioned before, we did have a strategic plan to help us through this difficult time. And I just wanted to touch on some of the important items, which is maintaining our reserve at the policy levels. City Council has a fund policy that says we have a 30% set aside mandate for any unrestricted funds. So that's approximately 5.6 million of that $13 million that we will have in reserves at the end of the year. We want to continue to monitor the city's fiscal health. So the finance department will continuously be making sure that revenues are coming in as anticipated. And as Alex mentioned, we'll be bringing this back to council more frequently because of the situation that we're in. So starting with probably the first quarter, at the end of the first quarter, we'll just bring an update. Like I said, good, bad, status quo, we'll bring it in anyways, just so staff knows where we are and council's aware of what's going on. We'll continue to develop both short-term and long-term options, preparing for both a good and a bad outcome, and we'll continuously implement and monitor the results. Our budget public hearing is June 17th here in the council chambers at 4 p.m. and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that anybody might have.
Wow.
I know it's a lot of information.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question, Sonia. What services are being exchanged between the city and the school district right now?
Does anybody have an answer? I don't know that.
Well, we do. I think I just turned it off. We do have the joint facilities joint use agreement. I believe we are using some of the facilities. We were using some of the facilities for recreation.
Alex?
Basketball, was used there. Mark, are you aware of any other recreation programs?
Are you on?
Okay.
You are
I'm sorry. I believe we just used, when we were going normal, we were just using Pacheco High for our basketball program. And I don't believe they have any reciprocal use that they used in the last year or two. So
They currently, or they were using
Hall.
the chambers for their board meetings. Other than that, I'm not certain there are any other services.
So we were, or are we still using outside of the COVID their basketball courts for recreation? Is that still something that they offer us?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
And when they utilize the council chambers, they obviously aren't paying to use the chambers, but they do reimburse us for staff time. So if we have somebody over here, like IT running the cameras and the system, we are reimbursed for that time.
Okay, so, but nothing for utilities or anything
No.
like that?
No.
And when we use their basketball facility, we pay for their normal janitorial services, plus their basketball players serve as our referees, and in turn, the program gives scholarships back to Pacheco.
Okay, so, you know, I'm looking at equity-wise because generally under government services, you don't give away free services, even if it's to another government agency. So I just want to make sure that, you know, things are pretty equitable here
Yeah,
as
the
far as
things-
the exchange is concerned.
The large items that we do for the school district, they pay for. So the SROs, we have contracts with the school district to
But
reimbursement.
they're contracting a service.
Yes,
So they have
and-
to pay for that.
yes,
I'm talking
they-
about the stuff like
The-
exchange for the chambers versus something else that we're using of theirs.
No, we don't really give anything away free besides like, okay, yes, they use the chambers in return for something else. But everything else, utilities and things like that, they pay at the regular cost.
Here,
Yes.
okay. All right, thank you.
I had a question. I know the splash pad is built into up into the upcoming budget, but and I know it's even hard to look at what we're building out right now due to COVID and everything. But is there a date perhaps in the future that we're hoping to at least get more information on the splash pad?
We'll be working towards that goal as the park master plan gets completed, because you'll have suggestions of areas to put that in. Then we'll hold public meetings, so the public can come in and tell us where that would be, and then from getting a location with public input, we can start designing that, and that's what this next fiscal year is for, hopefully with construction beginning next fiscal year, if we have the funding.
And are we still looking into the, I believe we were looking into some type of funding a few months ago through, I think Stacy was looking through some funding, perhaps get the splash pad in.
No, that funding did not come through. That was the CBDG funds, and I think the only part of that funding that came in was the code enforcement, which Stacy's still trying to get the applications processed through the.
I got you. And that's not like a fund that'll come up anytime soon. It's just.
Oh,
what's happening.
next time it comes up, we could apply again, but we've been 0 for 2 now on it, so.
Okay.
But we can still try.
Thank you. I'm good, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else questions? Okay. I'd like to expedite the splash pad. It's already delayed, and we really need this with the weather here in Los Banos. And it's whatever we can do to, and we can discuss this further at another night and see what we can do. But hopefully COVID's going to end, and we can have a splash pad ready for the timing. So whatever we can do, we need to do it. Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, I do have one comment.
Yes.
Just for clarification, lots of information tonight, but did want to clarify and point out in regard to the enterprise funds, just a lot of information, don't want it to be lost on the council. We've built the budget and for those rate-based enterprise funds, a 2.9% increase in those funds. Just want to be clear on that budget includes that, and don't want that to get lost in the massive amount of information we provided to you this evening.
Okay.
So that's all.
Thank you. And I'll ask again, any questions from council at this time? Any additional comments from staff? Well, Sonia, thank you. A lot of information. We'll come back and we'll think about what you've said and come back and talk about this some more. So it was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 6:22.
Can you adjourn to?
Oh, I can adjourn to June 9th? Is that correct? June 9th at 4 PM. Yeah.